A blind 5-year-old girl senses danger before anyone else and pulls Keanu Reeves away from a deadly trap seconds before it explodes. She thinks she'll just return to her ordinary, difficult life. But the next day, the man she saved appears at her door with a life-changing surprise. There's something about the way a 5-year-old grips your fingers that makes you believe the world is still safe. But that morning in downtown Los Angeles, danger was hiding in the middle of a movie set, and the only person who felt it coming was a little girl who couldn't even see it. Lila's white cane tapped the sidewalk in a steady rhythm as her mother guided her through the noise and heat of the city. She was 5, tiny and blind from birth, but she walked with a stubborn little confidence that made strangers smile. The air smelled like gasoline and roasted nuts from a street cart. Somewhere a bus hissed to a stop. Somewhere else a man cursed at traffic. To Lila, the whole city was a giant radio turned up too loud, full of sounds that helped her draw pictures in her mind. Her mother, Sophia, held her hand a little tighter as they turned the corner and walked straight into a wall of sound, cheering, clapping, excited voices blending into one. Lila stopped, her cane in midair. "Mama, why is the air shaking?" she asked softly. She could feel the vibration in the concrete under her shoes. Sophia lifted her head, surprised. Ahead of them, the street was closed off with metal barriers. Bright lights, cameras, and thick cables snaked along the ground. A crowd had gathered, phones raised, voices buzzing with excitement. On the other side of the barrier, crew members in headsets rushed back and forth. At the very center of it all, getting out of a black car with the door held open by a security guard, was Keanu Reeves. "Oh," Sophia breathed, half laughing. "They're filming a movie here, that's why it's loud. People are excited. That man walking now, that's Keanu Reeves." Lila tilted her head, listening. She had heard his name before. Her older brother loved his movies and used to describe them to her in dramatic whispers, acting out the fight scenes in their tiny living room. "Is he the man who saves people?" she asked. Sophia smiled. "In the movies, yes, and in real life he's supposed to be very kind." She hesitated, then added in a softer voice, "Like you." The crowd roared as Keanu walked closer to them, waving shyly, almost awkwardly, like he wasn't fully comfortable being the center of attention. Lila couldn't see him, but she heard the way people's voices changed when they said his name, lighter, happier, as if he carried calm with him. She heard his footsteps on the pavement, steady and unhurried. She could tell just from the sound that he didn't rush past the fans. He stopped, signed something, laughed with someone, thanked another person. The word "thank you" kept coming from his mouth like it was his habit, not just part of an act. Then, unexpectedly, his voice came closer. "Hey there," he said, and Lila felt a shadow fall across her face as he stepped to the edge of the barrier near her. "You okay? Little crowded here, huh?" Sophia froze, shocked that he'd noticed them in the middle of everything. "She's fine, thank you," she managed. She really likes hearing about your movies. She's blind, so her brother describes them." Keanu's voice warmed. "Hi, I'm Keanu." He didn't speak to the air. He turned his body so she could feel he was facing her. "What's your name?" "Lila," she said, her fingers tightening on her cane. "Are you really nice, or is that just for cameras?" The words slipped out before she could pull them back. Sophia's eyes went wide. "Lila." But Keanu chuckled, a low, genuine sound. "That's a fair question," he said. "I try to be nice all the time, even when nobody's watching. I don't always get it right, but I try." There was a pause. "Can I shake your hand?" Lila lifted her small hand toward the sound of his voice, but then hesitated. Can I touch your face instead?" she whispered. "That's how I see people." There was a tiny silence, the kind that feels like the world holding its breath. Somewhere, a crew member muttered about the schedule. A security guard shifted his weight, but Keanu just said, without a trace of discomfort, "Of course." He stepped closer, lowering himself so they were on almost the same level. A guard started to protest, then stopped when Keanu lifted a calm hand. Lila's fingers reached through the gap in the barrier, brushing rough stubble, the bridge of his nose, the familiar shape of a human smile. His face wasn't some perfect statue like people described movie stars. It felt real, kind, a little tired around the eyes. She felt him smile wider when her fingers traced the corners of his mouth. "You feel like someone who listens," she said seriously. He let out a soft breath, surprised. I hope so, he answered. The world needs more listening. Then his assistant called his name sharply from behind, reminding him they were late. I have to go pretend to jump off a building now, he told Lila, his voice playful. But meeting you was my favorite part of the day. Lila's chest glowed with a warm, fuzzy pride. She wanted to tell him thank you, to ask 1,000 questions, to ask if being brave in real life felt different than in movies. But before she could speak, he squeezed her hand gently and stepped back. The crowd swallowed him again, shouts, cameras flashing, the low rumble of the director barking instructions. As he walked away, something changed in the sound of the air. Lila frowned. It was small at first, almost nothing. A tiny metallic rattle beneath all the noise. A soft electronic ticking, too fast and too sharp to be a normal city sound. It was coming from the left, close to where they had just been standing. She tilted her head, focusing, filtering the world the way she always did. "Mama," she whispered, "do you hear that?" Sophia was busy watching the set, eyes wide. Fans were pushing closer to the barrier, stretching their arms out, screaming his name. "Hear what, me Ammer? They're starting the scene. It's just equipment." Lila shook her head, her small brow folding. It wasn't just equipment. Underneath the shouts, she heard a low, steady hum like something charging up. She smelled something strange, too, a faint burning scent, sharp and plastic, that didn't belong with the hot dogs and car exhaust. The sidewalk under her feet seemed to buzz faintly, like the way the walls at home shook when the washing machine was on spin cycle. Her heart started to thump faster. "Something's wrong," she murmured. "It's too loud in one place and too quiet in another, like the street is holding its breath." A memory flashed in her mind. A month ago, her mother's old radio had started to smoke. Lila had been in the next room but heard the weird buzzing and smelled the burning first. She'd screamed, and her mother had unplugged it just before the outlet sparked. Everyone had laughed afterward, calling her little superhero. But Sophia had also said something Lila couldn't forget. "Sometimes you notice things the rest of us miss." Now that same cold feeling slid into her stomach. On the other side of the street, Keanu was walking toward a stack of crates and a metal scaffolding where the next scene would take place. Crew members moved around him, focused, tired, and distracted. Nobody was listening to the ground. Nobody was listening to the quiet. Lila took a step forward, then another, tugging at her mother's hand. "Mama, we have to tell them," she said, her voice rising. "Something's wrong over there. It feels bad." Sophia looked down at her, torn between faith in her daughter's strange sensitivities and the harsh logic of adult life. Security guards stood along the barrier, watching the crowd closely. These were professionals, trained, serious. There were cameras, directors, people who did this every day, who would listen to a blind 5-year-old girl talking about a feeling. "Lila, it's a movie set," Sophia said softly, though her own fingers had grown cold. "They have everything under control. We can't just—" "I know what a movie sounds like," Lila snapped, surprising even herself. "This doesn't sound right." Her lower lip trembled, but she lifted her chin. She didn't have eyes, but she had something else. And something inside her screamed that if she kept quiet, something terrible would happen. She thought of Keanu's smile when she touched his face. The way he had said the world needed more listening. What good was listening if she was too scared to speak? Her chest hurt with fear. She was small. The barrier was tall. The guards were big. She knew what it felt like to be ignored. Doctors had ignored her when she'd said the light hurt, before they discovered her eyes would never work. Teachers had talked over her when she said she understood more than they thought. Being blind meant always having to prove she wasn't just a fragile doll. This time, she decided, she wouldn't wait to be given permission. Before Sophia could react, Lila wrenched her hand free and darted toward the sound of danger, her cane tapping fast against the concrete. "Lila!" Sophia gasped, heart slamming, reaching out too late. The crowd parted in confusion as the tiny girl slipped between bodies, moving with surprising accuracy toward the barrier. A security guard reached for her, startled, but she was already there, gripping the cold metal bar with both hands. "Stop," Lila shouted, her voice cutting through the noise like broken glass. "Don't go there, run, it's a trap." The words hung in the air, strange and too real on a set built out of fake danger. People laughed nervously, thinking it was some kind of line from the script. A crew member rolled his eyes, One of the extras snickered. "Cute kid," someone muttered. But Keanu, a few steps from the scaffolding, turned at the sound of her panic. His face shifted from confusion to concern as he saw the little girl he'd just met, shaking, gripping the barrier like her life depended on it. "Lila," he called, his voice suddenly serious. She opened her mouth to shout again, but before she could speak, the faint ticking in the air stopped, and from somewhere beneath the metal platform ahead of him, there was a short, sharp metallic click, like a trigger giving way. The click was small, but in Lila's world, small sounds were the loudest. It came from under the metal platform where Keanu had been heading, a sharp little snap that didn't belong to cables or cameras or any machine she knew. The air changed with it, pressure shifting, a tightness like the sky was pulling in a breath and forgetting how to let it go. Her heartbeat slammed into her ears, drowning out the crowd for a second. "Keanu, move," she screamed, her voice cracking. He froze mid-step, eyes flicking from the scaffolding to the little girl gripping the barrier like she was hanging off a cliff. There was no time to think, no time for logic, only a flash of every stunt coordinator he'd ever worked with, every moment he'd been told, "If something feels wrong, trust it." He didn't know why a blind 5-year-old girl sounded more real than the professionals around him, but she did. He pivoted hard, lunging away from the platform. At the same instant, a white-hot burst of light flared under the metal, followed by a violent whump that folded the air in half. The ground kicked back at his feet. A wave of heat and dust punched outward like an invisible fist. The platform lurched, one of its supports snapping with a screech of tearing metal. A camera operator shouted. A stunt double-dove sideways. Wooden crates exploded into splinters as something beneath them blasted apart. People screamed, but their voices came half a second late, trailing the shockwave. On the sidewalk, Sophia threw herself over Lila, wrapping her arms around her daughter's small body as the air hammered into them. Dust and grit stung their faces. Lila lost her grip on the barrier and crashed onto the concrete, her cane clattering out of reach. Her ears rang, the world spinning into dull, muffled chaos. For a moment, everything slowed. Keanu hit the ground hard, rolling on instinct the way years of action training had taught him. A chunk of debris slammed down where his head had been a heartbeat before, shattering on the pavement. Pain spiked through his shoulder, but he pushed up anyway, coughing, blinking against the cloud of gray. The scaffold leaned at an ugly angle, one side sagging where the force of the blast had ripped out a joint. A light rig dangled dangerously over the set. Cables sparked. A crew member lay on the ground, clutching his leg, groaning. Someone yelled for the medic. Someone else shouted, "Cut, cut, get everyone back." Keanu didn't listen. His first instinct was not to check his own body, but to look for the people around him. He scrambled toward the nearest grip, who was struggling to stand, and hauled him away from the swaying tower, ignoring the sting of a cut across his forearm. "You okay? Can you move your toes? Look at me," he said, voice sharp with focus but gentle at the edges. The man nodded, shaking, and Keanu passed him to two others rushing in to help. Only then did he spin toward the crowd. "Where's Lila?" The barrier was bent and dusty. People were backing away in a panicked wave, some crying, some filming with trembling hands. Security shouted at everyone to stay calm, their voices doing the exact opposite. Keanu's chest tightened. For one horrible second, he imagined that tiny white cane lying broken under a piece of metal. "Lila," he shouted, his voice rough. "Where is she?" Under Sophia's arms, Lila gasped in a lungful of powdered air. Her ears hissed with ringing. Every sound had turned to cotton, but her fingers were still there, her legs, her face. She reached up blindly and felt wetness along her forehead, warm and sticky. "Mama," she whispered, "did the world break?" Sophia rolled off her carefully, her own knees scraped, heart racing like it wanted to break out of her chest. There was a small gash on Lila's hairline from where she'd hit the pavement, blood trickling down toward her temple. Sophia's breath caught. "You're bleeding," she choked. Lila's hands flew to her face. "Did I do something wrong?" The guilt hit her before the pain. She had shouted at a movie star. She had crossed a line. She had broken all the invisible rules that ruled adults' lives, if this was her fault. No, Sophia said fiercely, pulling her into a hug, dust and fear clinging to both of them. No, me Ammer, you saved him, you saved all of us. Her voice shook, but the truth of it rang clear. A security guard reached them, eyes wide, radio screaming static at his shoulder. Are you too hurt? He asked, already scanning for worse injuries. He stared at Lila's white cane a few feet away, then at her closed eyes, realization dawning. You're the kid who yelled. Lila flinched, but before she could answer, another voice cut through the noise. Is she okay? Keanu pushed past the guard, ignoring the protests. Dust streaked his face. There was a streak of blood on his arm he hadn't noticed yet, and his hair was full of tiny fragments of something that used to be plastic. But his eyes were clear, focused only on the little girl on the ground. Lila heard the familiar voice and sagged with relief. You didn't disappear, she murmured. He knelt down quickly, lowering himself again to her level. Not for lack of trying, apparently, he said, trying for lightness that almost covered the tremor in his voice. He took in the cut on her forehead and swallowed. Can I touch your hand? She nodded, and his fingers wrapped around hers, warm and steady. Hey, he said softly. You told me to run, I listened, that was very brave. Behind them, crew members argued about gas lines and special effects. Someone insisted it had to be a malfunction. Another whispered the word sabotage like it tasted poisonous. A fire truck siren wailed in the distance, growing louder. The director paced in angry circles, torn between panic, fury, and the sick realization that if that little girl hadn't screamed, his lead actor might be lying on the ground instead of standing. A police officer started toward them, but a producer stepped in front of him, murmuring something about statements later, not now, let the paramedics through. Lawyers were already arriving in people's minds. Lila squeezed Keanu's hand. The ground was humming, she said, still shaking. Like it was scared, I got scared too. Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave, he told her quietly. Brave is what you do while you're scared. His own fear was a cold knot under his ribs. In his line of work, he'd faced choreographed danger 1,000 times. None of it had ever felt like this. Raw, messy, uncontrolled, a reminder that real life didn't yell cut when something went wrong. Paramedics finally reached them. One of them knelt beside Lila, flashlight in hand. Hey there, Prinsa, the woman said gently. Can I look at that bump on your head? You might need a couple of stitches, okay? Sophia nodded quickly. Take her, please. Keanu's hand slipped from Lila, as they lifted her onto a small stretcher, but he stayed close, walking beside them toward the waiting ambulance. Cameras followed, but for once he didn't care. A reporter shouted a question about the explosion, shoving a mic forward. He barely glanced at them. Outside the ambulance doors, the paramedic looked up at him. We've got it from here, sir. Keanu hesitated. He didn't want to leave. Leaving felt wrong, like closing a book halfway through the most important chapter. But people were calling his name, producers, the director, a fire chief who wanted to know if he was injured. There were forms, questions, investigations. He leaned in quickly toward Lila, who lay on the small stretcher with a gauze pad pressed to her forehead. Hey, he said, softer now, the chaos dimming around them. I have to talk to some people about what happened, but I'm going to see you again. That's a promise, okay? People had promised Lila a lot of things in her short life. That her eyes might get better, that they'd move to a bigger apartment, that kids wouldn't make fun of her at school. Many of those promises had broken quietly, like thin glass no one wanted to clean up. But his voice felt different, heavier, like a stone that wouldn't float away. You won't forget, she asked. He shook his head. You saved my life. I'm not the kind of guy who forgets that. The paramedic shut the ambulance doors. The last thing Lila heard before the siren swallowed the world was his voice, muffled through the metal. Find out her name, her address, everything. Not for the press, for me. She didn't know that at that exact moment across the street, someone raised a phone, replaying the video they'd just recorded. A tiny blind girl screaming, "Run, it's a trap!" And a movie star changing direction a split second before the blast. By nightfall, that video would be on every screen in the city. Lila closed her sightless eyes as the ambulance pulled away, clutching the ghost of Keanu's hand in her own. completely unaware that the entire world was about to learn her name. The morning after the explosion, the sun rose on Los Angeles like nothing had happened. The sky was a flat, clean blue, the traffic was the same rude orchestra, and the city's million problems went on exactly as before. Inside a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a weathered building, the world felt completely different. Lila lay on the old couch with a soft blanket over her legs, a bandage across her forehead like a tiny white flag. Her head ached with a slow, heavy throb. Every loud sound made her flinch. The smell of coffee from the kitchen mixed with the sharp, strange odor of hospital disinfectant still clinging to her clothes. Sophia moved quietly between the stove and the small table, her movements too careful, like any sudden motion might make the last 24 hours real. The hospital had cleared Lila with a mild concussion and a few stitches. "She's lucky," the doctor had said. Sophia didn't feel lucky. She felt like someone had taken her heart out, shaken it, and pushed it back and upside down. "Mama," Lila called softly. "Yes, me Ammer," Sophia answered instantly by her side. "Is the world still humming?" Sophia sat on the edge of the couch and brushed a curl back from Lila's face. "Just the refrigerator," she said, forcing a smile, "and the neighbor's loud TV." "Are they mad at me?" Lila asked. "The movie people." Sophia's hand tightened on the blanket. She thought about the producer's strained smile, the way the security guard had looked at them when police started asking questions, the quiet, careful voice of the officer who had taken her statement. "So your daughter just sensed it." Sophia hadn't known how to answer that without sounding crazy. "No one is mad at you," she said firmly. "You saved a man's life, don't ever forget that." "But everything exploded anyway," Lila whispered. "Maybe if I had shouted sooner." "Stop," Sophia's voice came out sharper than she meant. She took a breath, softened it. "Lila, listen to me. You were 5 years old in the middle of a city you couldn't even see, and you warned people about something the rest of us didn't hear at all. That's not failure. That's a miracle." Lila turned her face toward her mother's voice, her eyes as empty and beautiful as always. "Miracles are supposed to feel nice," she said quietly. On the small second-hand TV across the room, a news anchor's voice filled the air. New footage from yesterday's on-set accident downtown, where actor Keanu Reeves narrowly escaped serious injury thanks to an unlikely hero. Sophia snatched the remote and hit mute, but it was too late. Lila's head turned toward the silent, flickering light, instinctively chasing the story. "Is that me?" Lila asked. Sophia hesitated, then nodded even though her daughter couldn't see it. "Someone filmed you when you shouted." "Do I look stupid?" Lila's fingers twisted in the blanket. Sophia's throat tightened. "You look brave," she said, "terrified and brave and very, very small." "Can I hear it?" Lila asked after a moment. "Just once." Sophia thought of the reporters who had already called the hospital, wanting interviews, wanting quotes. Of the talent agency email in her inbox from some stranger who saw opportunity. Of the way the world chewed people up and called it attention. She also thought of Keanu's face in the chaos, the way he'd looked at Lila like she was a person, not a story. Slowly, she turned the volume back on. The TV replayed the moment in a shaky phone video. The crowd, the little girl pushing forward, cane tapping, her thin voice amplified through the speakers. "Stop! Don't go there! Run! It's a trap!" Then the jump cut to the blast, the platform shuddering, Keanu diving out of frame. The news anchor's voice came in again. "Social media is calling her the little oracle. #BlindAngel has trended overnight with fans praising." Sophia clicked the TV off. "That's enough," she said. Lila's face felt hot, even without seeing the screen. "They're laughing at me, aren't they? Or they think it's a movie." "I think," Sophia said slowly, "that some people don't know how to feel real things unless they're watching them on a screen. But you don't have to live in their world." "I kind of already do," Lila whispered. "It's the only one I've got." The apartment door creaked open as Mateo, her 14-year-old brother, stumbled in from the bedroom he'd given up so Lila could have the quieter corner of the living room. His hair was a mess, and his eyes were ringed with dark circles. He'd barely slept since the hospital. "Hey, superhero," he said, trying for casual swagger and landing somewhere near breaking. "You ready for your fan club? Half my school texted me. They all think my sister is in the Matrix now." Lila smiled faintly. "Maybe you should be my agent," she said. "Only if I get 10% of your snack money," he shot back, then his voice softened. "You scared me, Lila, don't do that again." She reached out and he took her hand, squeezing it like he'd never let go. While their tiny living room filled with the quiet weight of family, somewhere across town another man watched the same footage, his jaw tight. In a hotel suite that felt too big and too empty, Keanu sat on the edge of the bed in sweatpants and a faded t-shirt, the remote heavy in his hand. The video played and replayed on the news, but he didn't need the TV anymore. The moment was burned into his brain. The sound of her voice, the direction of her scream, the exact angle his foot had turned when he listened. "You okay, man?" his manager asked from the armchair, phone buzzing nonstop with emails and requests. "We can spin this 100 ways, talk shows, interviews. Keanu's little guardian angel. They want you two together on a couch by next week." Keanu muted the TV and set the remote down with care. "She's not a prop," he said quietly. His manager sighed. I know, I'm just telling you what's out there. Studios are already saying this is good publicity in a bad situation. You know how it goes." "That was an explosion, not a marketing campaign," Keanu replied, a hard edge under his calm. "Somebody messed up, or somebody wanted to hurt people, and a kid almost got killed trying to stop it." He rubbed a hand over his face. He wasn't young anymore. He'd outlived people he loved. He'd learned the hard way that life didn't give you many clear second chances. Yesterday, a little girl who couldn't see had thrown herself at the world and shouted for it to listen, and he had lived because of it. "Did you get her information?" he asked. His assistant, who'd been silently working on a laptop by the window, looked up. "Yeah, I pulled it from the incident report and the hospital records. Her name is Lila Reyes, lives with her mom and older brother. Dad's not listed. There's a note about financial hardship, medical bills. She's been blind since birth." His manager perked up. "We could cover her medical costs as a goodwill thing, quietly if you want, or we set up a foundation in her name. The Lila Fund." Keanu held up a hand. "Stop talking like this is a brand," he said. "She's a person, a child. I want to see her. No cameras, no press, just me." His manager frowned. "You show up at some poor family's apartment and knock on the door alone, it's gonna be on the internet in 15 minutes. "Then it's on the internet," Keanu said calmly, "but not because I invited it." He stood, grabbed a worn black baseball cap from the dresser, and pulled it low over his eyes. He looked suddenly smaller, less like a movie icon and more like any tired man trying not to be recognized at the grocery store. "You can't fix everything for her," his manager said quietly as he headed for the door. "I know," Keanu answered, "but I can start by keeping one promise." He left his phone on the nightstand, took only his keys, and told his driver he wouldn't need the car. Outside, the city moved around him like always, people walking dogs, scrolling through their phones, complaining about traffic. A few glanced his way, squinting as if they recognized something familiar and then letting it go. He walked. As he moved through streets that smelled like coffee and old rain, he thought about the themes he'd acted out on screen for decades. Courage, sacrifice, the lonely hero who keeps going no matter what. It was easy when there were stunt doubles and rehearsed lines. Harder when the hero was a 5-year-old girl who'd never seen a movie in her life. He thought about humility, about how many times life had humbled him, taken the people he loved, stripped away illusions of control. Yesterday, a blind child had reminded him again. No matter how famous you were, you still needed other people. You still owed them something when they saved you. By the time he reached the worn building with peeling paint and a crooked row of mailboxes, his legs ached, but his mind was clear. 3rd floor, apartment 3B. He climbed the stairs slowly, feeling every step. Outside the door, he paused, suddenly nervous. What if they didn't want him there? What if his presence just made their lives harder? What if Lila tagged him in her memory as another adult who promised and disappeared? He raised his hand and knocked. Inside, Mateo muttered, "If that's another reporter, I'm gonna throw the remote at them," and stomped toward the door. Sophia wiped her hands on a dish towel, her heart kicking up. More questions, more cameras, more strangers wanting a piece of the worst day of their lives. The door swung open. Mateo froze. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. Keanu stood in the hallway, cap low, no entourage, no polished smile. Just a man with dust still under his nails, a faint bandage on his forearm, and eyes that looked suddenly unsure. "Hi," he said, almost shy. I was wondering if I could talk to Lila."